I don't know what to make of this. Bobby the Brain Heenan with the perfect encapsulation of World Championship Wrestling status in 1999 and beyond. And there wasn't much beyond 1999, and with this pay-per-view, you can certainly see why. I'm John Rant with the retro view of WCW Slamboree 1999. Let me know your thoughts on this show in the comments, please. Oh boy, WCW in 1999. Not nearly as bad as WCW in 2000. I still can't believe that I retro-viewed everything from the reboot episode all the way to the very last Nitro and somehow didn't lose what little sanity I still have. Actually, I can believe it because I've got to give the people what they want. One of my friends will pop for that. They know who they are, and I decided, because some people wanted me to do this, okay, why not go back and revisit something that happened just over 25 years ago. This happened on May 9th, 1999, 2 weeks before WWF Over the Edge 99, which I've decided I can't retro view that. I thought about it. I've tried. I can't. I can't do that. Because that show is depressing for very obvious reasons. First of all, I resent your tone. A whole bunch of other stuff that Vince McMahon did. That show should have been stopped. It should have never continued. And then you have World Championship Wrestling. Now, they would be in the same venue that Over the Edge 99 took place in, but I'll get to that here in a bit. But let's get to some facts and figures. So first, they were in the TWA Dome in St. Louis, Missouri, shrieking Sam Muchnick noises from beyond the grave, because Sam Muchnick would have rose from his grave and slapped every single goddamn person involved in this program right across the goddamn face and basically just slapped him silly and just thrown him in the goddamn river. Whatever river they have in St. Louis. Whatever body of water they have in St. Louis, Sam Muchnick would have found a way to do that. It's a big old stadium. A big old sports stadium. 67K for U.S. football. I have to say U.S. football because for those across the pond, yes, we call our sport football, despite the fact you have football, the world sport. And it can be set up for 40K for basketball. It's a big old, massive stadium. Now, WCW has set up for 20,516 fans. They set up pretty goddamn well. And it was pretty full. And then you saw just how much more of that stadium wasn't full during one particular match. I'll get to that. But let's talk about the pay-per-view buys for this. 195,000 pay-per-view buys. So down from what Super Brawl was. Super Brawl was like 485,000 pay-per-view buys, and that was just in February, and then we went down to like 350 or so for Uncensored. We went down to about 250, 275 for Spring Stampede, and then this was just further proof that WCW is really starting to dive down, and my oh my, let's talk about the previous Slamboree events and the following Slamboree event. There was only one more Slamboree after this. So, 1993, they had 7,008 fans. Let's just call it 7,000 fans. Those 8 people don't count. Sorry to the last 8 people that bought those tickets, but you should have bought them sooner. They were in the Omni in Atlanta, 100,000 pay-per-view buys. For 1993 in WCW, given the state of that company, even though there was some good talent, not all that bad. 1994, 4,000 fans in the Philadelphia Civic Center. Okay, so the Philly Civic Center has a rich history. Maybe not as rich as the Omni, even though the Omni, I think, was leveled in the late 90s, early 2000s. I've seen shots of the Omni. It looked cool on the inside, but the outside had the weirdest roof and whatever. Who designed that? Anyway, 105,000 pay-per-view buys. Wow, a whole 5,000 more people said, we'll tune into this. WCW's catching a little fire. 1995, 7,000 fans in St. Petersburg, Florida. 110,000 pay-per-view buys. Okay, they are just really not ticking up all that high. But they have Hogan and Savage and others and everything, so everything's great. It's great with all these big money contracts for a wrestling company that's on TBS and TNT and I'm not talking about AEW, even if the similarities are there. So, 1996, they had just under 7,800 fans in Charlotte, North Carolina. And that was, well, actually, that was at Baton Rouge. I take that back. I mixed up a couple things. 1997 was in Charlotte. But they were in Baton Rouge in 96, and they had 155,000 pay-per-view buys. Not all that bad. Not that bad. By the way, WrestleNomics, shout out to them. They were the ones that compiled shit like this. I went to Google and looked up WrestleNomics stuff, and they do a lot of great work there. So, yeah, 1996, this was just before the NWO would take off. You had like, I believe, Luger and the Giant. You had various others. This is just before, I believe, Hall and Nash would arrive, if I recall correctly. I think Hall would arrive either the day after this pay-per-view or the week after. But then we go in 1997, just over 9,600 fans, that is. 9643 specifically. That's not how numbers work. They were in Charlotte. 220,000 pay-per-view buys. Okay, not all that bad, all things considered. WCW did really good pay-per-view buys in 1997. Despite the fact they botched everything by Starrcade 97. Even though they got 700-something thousand pay-per-view buys, they would never equal that. You know why they wouldn't equal that? Because they didn't give enough people a reason to justify, investing in a build that had a horrible payoff. So, 1998 had 11,592 fans in Worcestershire. 275,000 pay-per-view buys. Pretty good. So that was a high watermark. And then we would get to the 195,000 pay-per-view buys for the aforementioned Slamboree 1999. And then we would go to 2000. They were in the Kemper Arena, where Canyon took a plunge off of the steel cage and, went through a partition in the ramp. In the same building where Owen Hart died just about a year before. Maybe not even a year before. I don't quite remember the date of Slamboree 2000. I think it was maybe a week or so before that. So whoever booked that, Russo, was an idiot and an insensitive prick, but he had nothing to do with Owen's death. He just probably should have thought about that better. Anyway, so they have 7,165 fans in the Kemper Arena, which holds considerably more than that, and they had 65,000 pay-per-view buys. Gee, I wonder why WCW kept going further and further down to the point that 50,000 pay-per-view buys was going to be the norm for their last 4 or 5 pay-per-views. So, yeah, the downhill slide for WCW had commenced. I mean, really, after Super Brawl 9, even though you could argue the same night that Chris Jericho made his debut on Raw, they had Boise, Idaho Nitro. They had Hogan return the red and yellow, had a pretty electric crowd. And it was a pretty big goddamn deal. They had a pretty good crowd in Boise, Idaho. Yes, believe it or not, Boise, Idaho actually likes to do things like go to wrestling events and not, given to racism and guns over there. It's not everybody in Idaho. There's just a lot of racist churches there. If you know, you know. But that being said, I may actually retro-review that particular Raw and Nitro. Not do head-to-head thing like Wrestling Bios that does tremendous work, by the way, and you can check out their channel and support them if you can. But now let's get to this particular event, because there's a lot to say. Not about every match, but let's go. So, they wouldn't hit the bottom for a while, but they had hit the iceberg, and they were scraping along that iceberg, and honestly, by Road Wild 99, it was getting really dire. The dark match, by the way, was Dale Torborg. That is, Daryl Torborg would have been better. Carl, no, not that kind. He would later become the Kiss Demon. So yeah, not having to see Dale on a goddamn show, shrieking pit bull noises, was a good thing. He beat Johnny Swinger, who I believe is still wrestling, doing roughly the same gimmick. I don't know why. But anyway, package on the big matches and President Flair. And look, I'm just going to say right now, Wrestling Bios, by the way, no, I was not asked to do this. I just recently watched their WCW Blunder. It's like season 2 or whatever. I forget what they called it, the exact subtitle. But he did a great thing on President Flair, Ric Flair, coming back to WCW and beating Eric Bischoff to gain the presidency and everything. And it was a good idea, and yes, you could have had the power to corrupt him, and it could have worked, but the whole timeline made no sense. And by this point, people were sick of Flair. We want Flair. Came in, turned into, we don't want to see Flair anymore. They were really getting sick of Flair. I was getting sick of Flair. And as far as a wrestler, I love Ric Flair. Maybe not so much for a lot of shit he did outside the ring and everything, but let's be perfectly honest. Ric Flair is the nature boy and, a legend in the ring and on promos for a reason. But yeah, more pyro, goddammit. We needed more pyro for this goddamn intro. Good grief, that was a lot of pyro. By the way, sponsored by 1010-220. Who remembers those collect call commercials? There was 1010-321, 1010-220. 1-800 Collect, I think was the original, if I remember right. Yeah. Well, actually, I think 1010 220, 1010 321 were like a way to get discounts on long distance. Maybe they were collect. I don't fucking remember. So, Heenan, Shivani, and Mike Tenay call the action, and I just want to say, great t-shirt here. Heenan School of Broadcast Journalism. Personally, love Bobby Heenan. Wish he was still here. Wish he was healthy. More importantly, just still wish he was here. His speech at the Hall of Fame still got me. I wish Monsoon was here. God damn it. Here's Mean Janie plugs the hotline. So we go 8 minutes into this pay-per-view with packages and all that stuff before we get to the first match. So we have Raven and Perry Saturn. Less than a year after Saturn had disbanded the flock and Raven was all sad and everything, and Saturn had aired that feud with Chris Jericho and got his momentum killed and wore the dress and everything and wore whatever, and I don't really give a shit what anybody does. It's better than Moppy, but now he's rejoined. He's joined back up with Raven, who's the babyface, and Raven would actually leave the company soon after this. They took on Ray and Kidman, who were the WCW champions, or tag team champions, that is. And Ray had been unmasked recently because Eric Bischoff is a fucking idiot. I mean, he had great ideas, but he's still a fucking idiot. Can't wait for the Who Killed WCW 4-part series, so I can rip that the fuck apart. And they took on Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit, renowned murderer Chris Benoit, by the way, with Arn Anderson. 3-way tag title match. This is not the only 3-way that Chris Benoit would try to win, and, by any means necessary, by even locking the dogs in the enclosed pool area and leaving the side garage door open. Let me just say right now, it is difficult for me to still watch Chris Benoit matches. Now, I did watch as much of this match as I could, and there were good moments here. This was also, I believe, the second longest match of the show. And there were points where it's like, I don't think they need to jam more matches on the goddamn card, but this was a 2 hour and 46-minute pay-per-view that they had on Peacock, and this could have easily been cut down by a couple minutes. Now, there were some great moments. There was a nice moment where Saturn hit a belly-to-belly on Kidman, and Kidman hit the floor, smashing the floor. Smashing! It really sounded painful. Hit it with a resounding thud. No, not Kidman's promos. I'm sorry, but Kidman was not a good promo. He's a great wrestler, really flashy, got people on his side, not good on promos. So, Horsemen sucked, Horsemen suck, Horsemen suck chants. And, yeah, this was a pretty good match, but it really got messy. I mean, you could only tag your partner in. So, I mean, at least there was that, but just, it got messy. There were 3 guys that started in the ring, and I don't feel that this fully clicked. It was easily the highlight of the night. And that just proves how much this show really wasn't all that good. But it was messy. I think it went a bit too long, at about 17-something minutes. Arn, hit a spine buster. This is after he had to retire due to the botched neck surgery and all that, and the issues with his arm. He was one-armed Anderson. I'm sorry. He still pull out the Glock, though. And the masked guy ended up pulling Kidman down on the top turnbuckle, even flow, even though Dean had, I believe, Saturn locked in the clover queef. I know what it's called, but I don't care. Raven got the cover because the referee was confused. Let me just count this because it's in the finish. They made the referee take about 8 years to do that. New tag champions. Okay. The masked guy was Canyon, by the way. And then Canyon would he did this to get, the titles on Raven and Saturn. Kind of join up with the flock members, but then would join DDP and Bigelow, and they would become the Jersey Triad for not very long, unfortunately, even though they did some good shit. DDP package with generic music, and then Conan wants people to toss his salad and peel his potatoes. Yeah, I don't really understand that guy. I don't think I ever will. Stevie Ray with Horace and Vincent. Yes, Horace Hogan. Nepotism. Thy name is not George Goulas. Thy name is Horace Hogan. Took on Conan. This was a disaster. Not that I expected this to be good, but Stevie Ray was not really in his prime at this point. The whole black and white NWO thing was stupid. Just by this point, it was like, the C team. And then we had Chinlock City. Ray ended up interfering to stop the heels from interfering. I realized watching some of these matches, God, a couple of these people are gone. I mean, Benoit's gone. He's burning in hell. Vincent's gone. That's a shame. And a few others are also gone on this show. One I'll talk about here in a bit. That's the thing about looking at some of these WCW pay-per-views and even some of the WWF pay-per-views from like the 90s, even the early 2000s, you think, wow, some of these people have been gone for a while. But yeah, Ray hits his meated senton, and Conan rolls up Stevie and gets the victory. This is 6 minutes, and my God, it felt longer. This was bad. So we get a Kevin Nash package with Wolfpack music. Rick Steiner is at the WCW.com stand and should have Bulldog Mark Madden right through the goddamn table. That piece of shit. So, Sting video package. DDP then talks to Bigelow. And Bam Bam Bigelow then takes on Brian Knobbs, the sad sack of shit that he was at this point, in a hardcore match. So, Bam Bam had a cart full of weapons, like one of those laundry carts that you would find in a prison, which is where anybody who greenlit the hardcore division should have been shoved, because, yeah, I'm sorry, but like for every one of these matches that sort of worked, there were like 3 or 4 others that were just fucking dreadful. And this went 11 minutes and really felt long. One, Brian Adams couldn't work either, by that point. But Brian Knobbs was terrible. Him and Jerry Saggs were a pretty good team. But there were these headshots. Knowing what we know about CTE now was uncomfortable. Every time Mike tried to talk, the commentators would say, oh, shut up, let these headshots happen. This was stupid. It was not good. They went all over the place. Commentary just made fun of the whole thing. They went to the outside. They went to where the giant curtain was down, the part of the stadium, and they tried to go through and grab some more weapons, and they get through the curtain, and you just see a bunch of empty seats. A bunch. It's a 67,000 seat stadium. They had 20,000 people in there, and putting a curtain down, that's fine. Hell, Mid-South Wrestling, I think, maybe drew 25,000, 30,000 people for their biggest Superdome show. It might have been 25,000. So, and the Superdome seats significantly more than that. But the thing is that's when you put a curtain down, you do this, and it actually looks pretty goddamn good. And you do that, and it just reminds that even though 20,500 people is a big crowd, they had more in the Georgia Dome the first time. Not so much for the finger poke of doom. I think they had about 6,000 less. But, yeah, this wasn't good. Knobbs then misses the table because he's a motherfucking idiot and a sack of shit. I'm sorry. I just have never understood why they felt pushing Brian Knobbs as a single in the state that he was in at this point was a good idea. A suplex onto the table wins it. Bigelow wins it. And knowing what we know now about Bigelow and Dark Side of the Ring, yes, he was his own worst enemy, but god damn it, they did him no favors. So we get a Rick Steiner Booker T package. Rick Steiner had recently was being a little bit more heelish. Booker didn't like him attacking his brother. So we had this TV title match where the crowd first barked at Rick. They kind of booed Booker. And this was not good at all. There were, rest holds, a lot of rest holds, because Rick Steiner at this point wasn't exactly in his physical prime or encouraged to really do anything like wrestle or care. And Booker T, bless him, defending the TV championship. Booker T really should have been world champion in 99. Because by the time they got to it in 2000, they were spiraling out of control completely. So Scott Steiner comes down and ends up distracting and then tripping Booker. And then we get a Steiner Bulldog 1, 2, 3. And this is after Super Brawl 8, where Scott had conveniently turned on Rick Steiner, and Rick didn't know who the hell hit him, despite the fact he knew his brother was standing right above him. But that being said, the Steiners are reunited. Scott is a U.S. champion. Rick is a TV champion. Okay, and then, they aren't reunited yet, by the way. I should say that. It kind of spoiled a little bit of something, because Rick was yelling about all this stuff, but it was obvious what was going to happen. So we get a package on Charles Robinson and Gorgeous George. Rick's yelling backstage. Buff's confused about what's going on. I will talk about some things as to why this is all confusing later on. Gorgeous George, who I just want to say right now came off as such a lying little tramp on that Randy Savage documentary. And I know that Randy wasn't a perfect person. I'm not saying that he was. But it's kind of funny that they do this hit piece and she talks like Randy was this terrible person. And look, maybe her and Randy just were oil and water and they weren't meant to mix together. Randy was significantly older. She was significantly younger. who the fuck was she before Randy Savage came along? She was there's nothing wrong with being an exotic dancer or whatever the fuck she was, but who the fuck was she before Randy Savage brought her on television? And who the fuck has she been since? So that being said, Team Madness is there, Medusa, as well as, Miss Madness, who was, by the way, the future Molly Holly, who even took a body slam on the floor here because she was willing to do that. Randy Savage was there, and Gorgeous George took on Charles Robinson with Flair and Asia with a Y, because we're going to copy China. And you thought China couldn't wrestle. Asia's even worse. China at least could work with the guys. Asia couldn't work at all. Asia couldn't work against a corpse. So anyway, Randy Savage unfortunately is gone. Wish he wasn't. Wish he would have at least outlived the Ultimate Warrior. By the way, fuck the Ultimate Warrior. I'm glad he's dead. So yeah, if George wins, then Randy Savage is reinstated. Here's a question. Why is Randy allowed to be out at ringside if he's not reinstated? Reinstated as a wrestler? But if Flair's out there as the president, even though Flair and Piper are going to battle for the presidency, why didn't he just say, Savage, you're not reinstated. You can't be out here. Woo! Wings! I don't know why he didn't do that. Look, the crowd's shockingly like this. I can't say I necessarily love this, but you know what? They made the most of it. Gorgeous George was not a wrestler or an athlete. Charles Robinson made the most of being Little Nate. He was having a blast. There were arm ringers. There was the upside-down corner bump that Charles did. Credit to him. He did that. He even took an elbow from Randy Savage on a later pay-per-view where he got his ribs cracked, which must have hurt. But knee focus, we get interference. Savage ends up slamming Charles Robinson. And then we get an elbow drop from Gorgeous George that looked like a frog, being fried in a goddamn pan. Except the frog actually has usefulness. And actually serves a purpose on this planet, unlike her. But 1, 2, 3. So Gorgeous George gets a victory. Yeah, in case you can't tell, I'm not really a fan of Gorgeous George. We're just going to do this with the goddamn notes. Randy Savage is reinstated. And then he would literally wrestle another couple months. And his last pay-per-view match would be against Dennis fucking Rodman at Road Wild 99. And then he would have a couple matches, I believe, in TNA. If you want to call them matches. I think he had one, actually. He had one. He showed up at the end of the Turning Point 6-man. Oh boy. He was going to wrestle even on the WWA Las Vegas show, but then he didn't want to do that. Can you blame him? It was shit. Speaking of shit, Buff Bagwell and Scott Steiner had a match. U.S. title Battle of the Muscles. Buff jumpstarts. Scott takes over, yells at fans. He tries to use the steel chair. Buff just clotheslines the goddamn chair into Steiner's face. A ref bump. Rick comes in, and then he waffles Bagwell with the goddamn chair. And the recliner wins it, so Scott retains the U.S. champion, so the Steiners are reunited, as I spoiled a little bit earlier. Okay, Steiners broke up at Super Brawl 8. They build up this whole thing with Buff having a legit neck injury because of a botched bulldog by Rick Steiner. He didn't mean to. It was an inadvertent accident. And then they build up this whole thing where Scott and Rick really never got a chance to have their one-on-one thing. And it was around Halloween Havoc that they kind of just went away from that afterwards. So, this is months later, and now Buff, they're trying to push Buff as a babyface, despite the fact he comes across on TV as an unlikable douchebag, I just want to say. On TV. I don't know how he is in real life. But Rick then reunites with his brother that turned on him and tormented him for months. And they beat up this guy that was involved in the periphery and everything to put sympathy on Buff. It wasn't going to work. It didn't work at all. Speaking of not working, package on President Flair and Piper and Flair being locked in a mental institution and making fun of people that have mental illness. Oh, WCW, I fucking hate you. It wasn't even funny to me when I was 18 years old watching this stuff. I'm like, why is this on a wrestling program? I was actually convinced looking back on this. I go, are we sure that Vince Russo wasn't booking both shows? So Ric Flair with Arn and Asia. Because seeing Asia for even 5 fucking seconds reminds you that Jesus goddamn Christ, we probably shouldn't be putting monkey hormones in humans. took on Roddy Piper. I don't know who Asia is, or what Asia is actually doing. I don't know what her background was. I don't think she lasted very long in wrestling, but no. And did I mention no? So, for the presidency of WCW, Rick got Charles as the referee, kicking whoever the guy was. I don't actually remember the guy's name. It's not important. He looked like Earl Hebner's kid. I don't think he was, but he kind of looked like him. Brian Hebner, I think. The crowd cheered Roddy, but this was dreadful. One, neither guy could really go anymore, and this also dragged on. And it was only about 12 minutes, but the fact that it just involved constant interference, constant bullshit. Robinson wouldn't even call for it when the figure four spot had Rick yelling, it's like, I give up, I give up. I give up, I give up. So he ends up locking a sleeper on Arn. He gets a sleeper on Rick, and then he kisses Asia, which that right there would make me just consider cutting off my own goddamn dick and cutting myself in half, so I never had to do that again. I don't know what she did to me, but she's just very off-putting to me. So anyway, kisses Asia and puts a sleeper on her. With that thick of a goddamn neck, you would have almost needed a goddamn, series of belts just to hold that up. I don't know why she annoys me so much, but she just does. So anyway, Flair KOs him, and Flair gets the victory. Now, Flair's the president. Flair beat Bischoff a little bit ago, I think late December of 1998. And it was made to look like a goddamn idiot because Bischoff and others would get one over on him every single time. Bischoff comes down to reverse the decision, but he has no power, and we haven't seen him on television as much lately. And then Piper wins. Piper wins by default. And then tells Flair he's fired, and Flair yells at kids, and I don't get it. I don't fucking get what the point. Later, what was it, by Great American Bash at the Beach, 99, I think. It was either Great American Bash next month or Bash at the Beach 99. I'm sorry, I've reviewed so much shit. I've watched wrestling for nearly 40 goddamn years. It'll be 40 years next March. I've gotten to the point where just so much stuff blends together. But by the summer, Flair and Piper would be running the goddamn thing. Then Sting would win the presidency and give the power back to WCW. And then they bring in Vince fucking Russo, which would just run the whole goddamn thing. I don't know what to make of this, is what Bobby Heenan said. And that's not the perfect fucking encapsulation of what WCW is doing by this point. Speaking of not knowing what to make of this, Sting versus Goldberg. Clash of the Titans. Goldberg got booed a lot more than I remember. To be fair, they were asking him to put time in matches when he couldn't. And it was because they pushed him too goddamn soon. They needed to push him. But the fact is once that streak was over, once they did that bullshit, and once they didn't try to rebuild him, it didn't work. He was exposed here because Sting can only do so much, and Goldberg needed to be a monster. And the crowd basically was just pretty pissed at Goldberg. Goldberg did the corner bump without actually hitting the post. And then here's Bret Hart, who had quit the company after he had Goldberg spear a steel plate that he had wrapped around his body. Because Goldberg is a really smart individual that didn't think that Bret Hart had something up his sleeve or up his jersey. And he hits Goldberg with a chair after shoving the referee, and it's a no contest. Here's a question. If he shoves the ref and hits Goldberg, wouldn't that mean Goldberg won by DQ? Because he didn't hit Sting, even though he just beat up Sting at Halloween Havoc 98, and Sting was gone for a number of months because he went to rehab and then got saved. So he traded one addiction for another. But whatever. A no contest. And the Steiners attack Sting, the newly formed Steiners, reformed Steiners. Michael Buffer was a terrible, terrible ring announcer. Let's get ready to roar. He has a trademark, so I don't want to risk anything. Kevin Nash took on DDP for the world title. DDP won the title at Spring Stampede, and they turned him heel. We'll never understand that. Part of me almost wishes I had been to Spring Stampede because it was at the Tacoma Dome. which still is, by the way, about 70 miles from my house. And had I had the means at the time, I would have gone. But didn't exactly have the best mode of transportation at that point. And plus, it's fucking Tacoma. That, fucking goddamn, crack house place. I'm sorry. It's just terrible, terrible city. There are some good people in Tacoma, but there's no way to clean that goddamn city up unless you just basically sweep through it with goddamn bleach. So anyway, the crowd was very tired by this point. They really got tired as this match went for an agonizing 18 fucking minutes. Paige undid the buckle pad and then hit Kevin Nash with the microphone when the referee tried to put that back on. Not hearing the mic shot, but seeing Nash down, DDP almost got the victory. He did the figure 4 post spot, or tried to, and Nash pulled him into the post. And then the crowd basically, they were staring elsewhere. There was either a fight in the crowd or they were like, can we get to that exit before this match finishes? Probably we can. Then Savage shows up after a jackknife, stops the pinfall. The referee calls for a DQ. Then Bischoff and Doug Dillinger show up. Doug Dillinger leads Savage away. And then we get a messy restart because we get near falls that seem like they should end because these guys are fucking tired because they were old. And also the show was not very good. And DDP ends up doing the spot where he hits the chair into his head and everything. I did kind of like when Austin did that at one point. It was kind of funny. And then we get a low blow for 2. Then we get a boot into the face, hitting the chair into DDP's face. And jackknife 1, 2, 3. And Kevin Nash gets the victory, and he's the new world champion. So there, thanks DDP. Thanks for having that title for so long and turning him heel. And then Nash would have it till Bash at the Beach 99. And then Savage would win in a tag match where Sting could have pinned his own partner to win the tag title, or win the world title. It makes no goddamn sense in the world. Then Savage would drop it to Hogan. WCW 99, everybody. What a goddamn mess it was. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, though. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.